Hi, everyone. This is just a short introduction and overview to Module 3, Lesson 2 from the textbook The Americans, entitled Ideas Help Start a Revolution. And I want to point out to you right off the bat that the big idea is located right here, and you should definitely put that into your notes. The big idea is that tensions increased throughout the colonies until the Continental Congress declared independence on July 4th, 1776. So the big idea is about tensions increasing. So you're going to need examples from this reading in order to explain how or what the tensions were that led the Continental Congress to declare independence. And you're going to want to be able to explain which tension you think was the most important. Now, why it matters now is because the Declaration of Independence continues to be a very influential document. Many other countries have even adopted it and just added their own country's name into it when they declared their own independence, which is kind of the highest form of flattery when another country adopts your declaration for their own. I want to also remind you that you should be making vocabulary flashcards of the key terms and people when you see them, and this list right here would be essential for you to make. I think there's seven cards right there, so it shouldn't take you more than a few minutes to make those. And then as you go through the reading, make sure you identify who they are and then use those to study from. All right, so the very first section in your notes that you're going to want to have a heading for is right here. The colonies hover between peace and war. And that's basically just saying that people weren't sure if they wanted to rebel against their home country. It'd be hard for us to say that anyone should rebel against the United States, even though sometimes there might be some people who do. The thing is that they had to be convinced, right? Even after Lexington and Concord, even after all the fighting that had gone on, they still needed to be convinced. The Second Continental Congress was set up so that they could begin a radical sweeping plan. Right here it says a sweeping radical plan. Radical is something that's wildly unusual and not normal. And so this plan, this wildly unusual and not normal plan, was that each colony would set up its own government and that Congress would declare the colonies independent. That's something you don't come back from. Once you declare your independence, you have to fight for it, or else the government that you're declaring independence from will consider you a traitor, and we hang traitors in this country. So this is also when they began to organize their resistance, and they picked a young field commander by the name, well, not young, he's 43. His name was George Washington. So the Second Continental Congress picks George Washington to lead the army. And then you get the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was sort of the first time that they had an organized fight against the British. Lexington and Concord was more of a skirmish. This is now the first time the British and the Americans are going to stand face to face, toe to toe on the field of battle and fight. And it's a place called Bunker Hill. And guess what? The British won. But the British lost over 1,000 casualties. Let me, on my arrow, right here, you can see the British lost 1,000 casualties. And that lost battle unified the colonists into a collective that was fighting for something and dying for something. So it's a symbolic victory. But that doesn't convince everyone that they need to join the revolution. There's this olive branch petition, and that should actually be a heading in your. That should be a heading in your notes. The Olive Branch Petition was an attempt to return to the former harmony between Britain and the colonies, showing that they still weren't ready to rebel. They were still trying to find peace with the king. Remember that you should be trying to answer the reading check questions as you go along. And here about the Olive Branch Petition, do you think it was too little too late? At this point, is it possible to go back and make up and be British citizens again? Well, one thing that caused more people to decide they couldn't become British citizens again was common sense. And that's under this heading of the Patriots Declare Independence. And you're going to need to know why they declared independence. And one of the reasons is, of course, common sense. Common Sense was this 50-page pamphlet written by Thomas Paine when he called for people. A time had come for colonists to proclaim an independent republic and to form their own government. And he argued that a government established by the governed would be a great improvement over the king's rule. Now, that's huge. A government established by the governed had never happened before in human history. So this is one of the things that makes the American Revolution so special, and why it's important today is because it's about humanity and the rights of all people, not necessarily the rights of Americans. It's a universal revolution. So common sense, very important, because it's the first time that we hear that this is a revolution of universal values. So that leads the Continental Congress to declare independence by writing the Declaration of Independence, which is right here. The Declaration of Independence uses the British philosopher John Locke, who maintained that people enjoy natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Right? So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is how Jefferson wrote it, but it comes from John Locke. Again, it's an idea, right? The American Revolution is a revolution of ideas shared by all humanity. First, that the governed can govern themselves, and the second, that all people have individual rights to life and liberty and property. Now, as we move down here, it talks about the famous phrase, all men are created equal. But even in Jefferson's ideology, in Jefferson's time, it says that it's not really, it didn't really mean that. It didn't mean all people. It meant white landowning men. It did not mean women, Native Americans, or African American slaves, of course. I also wanted to point out to you this section here on Abigail Adams, who did fight for women's rights at the very earliest in our country's history. She encouraged her husband, John Adams, who went to the Continental Congress, to remember the ladies and be generous and favorable to them than your ancestors, and do not put such unlimited power into the hands of men. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. So she was ultimately betrayed by her husband. He did not remember the ladies, and we didn't give women the right to vote for much of the country's history. But it doesn't mean that women weren't already demanding equality, that this idea that a country was founded upon was something that was appealing to Native Americans, to African Americans, and to women. So moving down here, we'll see that once the revolution begins, Americans have to choose sides. So what are those sides? You will put this heading into your notes, and then you'll write down that there were loyalists to the king, and patriots who were rebelling against the king. So the patriots were a cause that was embraced by farmers, merchants, artisans, landowners, and elected officials. The loyalists remained loyal because they thought that the British were going to win the war, and they wanted to avoid being punished because, like I said, you hang traitors. So these people, the loyalists, ultimately picked the wrong side and were treated very badly by the patriots when they won the revolution. So here in this section of difficult decisions, you can use these questions to challenge your understanding. And if you can explain these, then you have a good understanding of the concepts in the text. So use these questions as a review sheet when you review for your test. Now, on this slide here, you'll see that there are different sides, patriots and loyalists, and they go into detail about each side. And there are examples of them for you to see. One I wanted to point out to you is James Armistead, who was African American who, as a slave, had been permitted to enlist in the Continental Army, and he was used as a spy. He would often go into the British camps and would spy, pretending to be a slave on the British, who didn't think he was anything but a slave, not realizing that he was actually a soldier for the Continental Army. And also remember here, Patriot Mercy Otis Warren, who was basically one of the early voices for women to participate in the revolution as well. Going down here in this box, this document-based investigation source, pay close attention because it goes into detail about the Tree of Liberty and the American patriots. He's seen here torturing a British customs officer after they had tarred and feathered him, they're pouring hot tea down his throat. All right, so that's it for this little check-in. Don't forget to do the review section right here as you prepare for your test, and I hope you enjoyed this. Good luck